Questions orales.
Oral questions. Questions orales. Honorable Leader of the Opposition, to be next Prime Minister Canada, Poilievre.
Unfortunately, Statistics Canada has revealed today that economic growth in Canada in the third quarter was at just 1%, a weak 1%, a third lower than expected, two-thirds lower than in the United States. Our per capita GDP has gone down for the last 8 quarters out of 9. And it's going down more quickly than in any other G7 country. Is this not the proof that doubling the debt and increasing taxes on capital gains is destroying our economy? The Honourable Minister of Public Works and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative leader is looking for good news. Well, interest rates are down. Inflation is down. Unemployment is down. But it's Halloween, Mr. Speaker, and there's one thing that scares kids. It's that the Conservative leader refuses to get his security clearance to protect Canadians and members of his caucus. When's he going to answer the question and protect...
The first words out of a Liberal's mouth today is politicizing Halloween. Of course it is.
The leader of the official opposition. What's scaring people is that their paychecks are getting smaller, Mr. Speaker, every year. And that paycheck can't buy a house because this government doubled the cost of housing. That minister, he's been trying to find affordable housing in his city, and he hasn't been able to after 9 years of this Liberal government, which has doubled the cost, despite the fact that in my time, we built 180,000 new affordable homes, and now we're proposing to cut the GST on new homes. Will he accept my common sense plan? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, kids in my riding are smarter than the Conservative leader thinks. They know how to count up to 6, and it's indeed 6 affordable housing units that the Conservative leader built. Not in my riding, but in all of Canada throughout his entire mandate when he was in charge of housing at the time. But Canadian kids need to know if they should be scared of him. He's not getting a security clearance to protect his own MPs.
Don't need it.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Statistics Canada reported terrible news for the Canadian economy today. It grew at a meager 1%, a third lower than foreseen, and lower than our population grew. In fact, it was the 8th out of the last 9th economic quarter where our per capita GDP shrunk. It's fallen more than any other G7 country since the year before COVID. This is the direct result of higher taxes on capital gains, on energy, on work. Why won't they accept our common sense plan? Better yet, why don't they call a carbon tax election so we can fix the economy?
There you go.
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
I know the leader of the official opposition doesn't like facts getting in the way of his good Halloween story, but here are the facts. Mr. Speaker, 1.6% inflation. The Bank of...
No one's listening to you, Randy.
Colleagues, it's important for those, of course, to be able to follow and for the chair to be able to follow what's being said. I'm having difficulty hearing this. I know people who are using the translation devices are also having difficulty. The Honourable Minister of
He didn't meet the mic.
Employment and Workforce Development from the top, please.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. There is a lot of chocolate being consumed on the other side. I can see how energized the Conservatives are, but they're upset because we're sharing the facts. 1.6% inflation in this country. Interest rates are down. 47,000 new jobs in the last month. The International Monetary Fund has Canada positioned as the fastest growing economy in the G7 in 2025. What else, Mr. Speaker? We're going to keep supporting Canadians. We're going to build houses from coast to coast. The Conservatives don't need to like it, but that's how we're supporting Canadians each and every day.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the American economy is roaring while the Canadian economy is snoring. In the most recently reported economic quarter, U.S. GDP grew 3 times faster than Canadian, despite our out-of-control population growth. In fact, per-person income is now lower than it was 10 years ago in Canada, while it's gone up 18% in the U.S. The gap between U.S. and Canadian incomes is worse than at any time in the last century. Why would they call a carbon tax election so Canadians can vote for powerful paychecks that buy affordable homes on safe streets?
There you go.
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, it's quite surprising that the Leader of the Opposition isn't taking the bare facts on board. But quite frankly, not just 1.6 inflation or 47,000 jobs. Let's go to what he's trying to distract Canadians from, which as Leader of the Official Opposition, as somebody who someday wants to sit on this side of the House, will simply not go and do the work to get security clearance. He will not protect his MPs. He will not protect Canadians. Shame on him, Mr. Speaker. Get his security clearance.
They're trying to bait Pierre into saying something that he shouldn't say, but it's not going to work.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Canada's collapsing a per-person economy. It means lower wages, which means that Canadians can afford less food, less housing, and governments can afford less for schools and hospitals. It's the direct result. These are first economic data points that have come out since they jacked up the capital gains tax and now driving billions of dollars south of the border. Why don't they follow our common sense plan to axe taxes? In fact, in addition to getting rid of the carbon tax, why not follow our plan to axe the GST on new homes to build 30,000 more per year? It's common sense. Let's bring it home.
There you go.
The Honourable
And he didn't skip a beat.
and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, we can do the facts game all day long. Let's just focus. The Leader of the Opposition likes to remind people that he has roots in Alberta. So let's talk about the Liberal government's investments in Alberta, Mr. Speaker. $22 billion in clean energy investments for clean electricity, for hydrogen, for greening the grid, for making sure that we have the greenest barrel of oil in the world, Mr. Speaker. The third in the world for foreign direct investment. We are the #1 in the world per capita for foreign direct investment. They don't want to tell Canadians about it. We will, and we'll make sure there are good jobs from coast to coast to coast.
Wow. The other Randy, oh, he's heckling. Speaker wants to mute the mic. He knows we're watching. He knows I'm going to write another strong-worded letter.
Mr. Speaker, more bad news from experts. New Stats Can data shows that per person GDP is shrinking again. For the 8th time in the last 9 quarters, Canadians are getting poorer. This is a made-in-Canada per capita recession that's lasted 2 years, caused by a government that's driven out investment by hiking taxes on everything: income, financial institutions, housing, fuel, and investment. The opposite is happening elsewhere. Yesterday, the U.S. Commerce Department said the U.S. economy grew at 2.8% last quarter. Will the government admit that this is a made-in-Canada per capita recession?
Yeah. Good job, sir.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, it seems that Conservatives can't see past their own doomsday narrative. Canada leads the G7 in reaching a soft landing in the global post-pandemic.
He looks and sounds like a puppet.
And highest
like a sock with googly eyes on it or something.
To cut interest rates not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times in a row. This is good news for homeowners who currently have mortgages that need renewal and for first-time home buyers. Inflation has fallen to 1.6% in September, marking 9 consecutive months within the Bank of Canada's target range. I count that as good news for Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, here's another expert from the Bank of Canada, Deputy Governor Carolyn Rogers. On March 24th, she issued a stark warning. She said Canada is falling behind other countries because of weak business investment, a lack of competition, and a failure to integrate immigrants into the workforce, all responsibilities of this government. She said, and I quote, "I'm saying that it's an emergency. It's time to break the glass." Simple question. Does the government agree with the Bank of Canada that we are in an economic emergency of their making?
Yeah. Yeah, our Canadian economy is absolutely down the drain.
The Canada governor has also reported numerous times that our government has stuck to its fiscal guardrails, which through that discipline has allowed
the Conservatives find that one pretty funny.
this country. The IMF also, in their World Economic Outlook, projects Canada to have the highest growth in the G7 in 2025. Wages in Canada have outpaced inflation for 20 months in a row. For Canadians, that means more jobs, better wages, and a higher living standard. We should be positive, and I will never apologize for being positive about the future of this country.
We're in a recession, and they don't want to admit it.
The honourable member from Durham.
New data from StatsCan confirms
Hey, not so new guy.
Canada GDP recession. Over 8 of the last 9 quarters, per capita GDP is in decline. To put that in practical terms, Mr. Speaker, the average American now earns $20,000 more than the average Canadian. The root cause is the Prime Minister's tax hikes. When will the Prime Minister axe the tax hikes that are making Canadians poorer?
Great question.
The honourable.
Yeah, he's making a good name for himself.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell something that the Conservative they want to acknowledge. The root cause of our success, Mr. Speaker, is our Canadian workers, Mr. Speaker. We have attracted record level of investment in this country. These people are reading, I don't know what. Talk to Volkswagen, talk to Honda, talk to Dow Chemical, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The honourable member from South Shore of St. Margaret's, please. I'm going to invite the honourable minister to start again. The honourable minister.
Speaker, I will always stand up in this house to talk about good news about Canada, Mr. Speaker. Exactly. Canadians should be cheering. This is the land of possibility, of opportunities. We have attracted record level of investment, Mr. Speaker, in this country. Just talk to the CEO of Honda, of Volkswagen, of Dow Chemical, of Nordville. People are investing in this country because they believe in our workers. We have the best workers in the world. We have the critical minerals. We have the energy. We have the access to market. We have what we need to win in the 21st century, Mr. Speaker.
Before I return the floor to the honourable member.
The Conservatives are laughing hard.
Second time. The honourable member from the South Shore of St. Margaret's to please not take the floor unless recognised by the chair. The honourable member from Durham.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals across the aisle may be having a party or some kind of celebration, it seems, but in the process, they are cutting the standard of living in Canada. They are slashing the quality of life for people in our country. It's their tax hikes, their increases in the capital gains tax, housing tax, carbon tax that are making life difficult for Canadians across our country. When will they accept some responsibility for what's happened for the last 9 years and axe the tax hikes that are making Canadians poorer?
Yeah.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House.
Talk about celebrations. 10 years ago today, former Conservative MP Dean Del Mastro was found guilty, Mr. Speaker, of violating the Elections Act. That was the Leader of the Conservatives' buddy at the time, Mr. Speaker. He actually went on to become
this guy's like
Secretary to
Ratatouille, but
and the Parliamentary Secretary,
not a successful chef.
Leader of the Conservative Party, who was advanced to become the Minister responsible for elections. He tried to delete thousands of Canadians from being able to vote, Mr. Speaker. Why should any Canadian have confidence in the Leader of the Conservative Party, Mr. Speaker?
Just a few days after the Leader of the Opposition introduced a common-sense plan to axe the GST on new home sales, even the Housing Minister's own advisors were raving about the proposal. Right. Economist Dr. Mike Moffat said, quote, "It's a bold, bold plan," and he calls himself, quote, "a big fan of the idea." He and other Canadians know that housing has become out of reach and the government has doubled its cost in this country. So will the Housing Minister listen to his own advisors and implement our common sense tax cut so that Canadians can finally afford a home?
There you go.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
If the member is going to quote Mike Moffat, Mr. Speaker, she ought to include the entire quote. What he said was that if the Conservative proposal was to go ahead, They ought not to propose things like getting rid of the Housing Accelerator Fund. They ought not to also get rid of infrastructure programs that enable housing, Mr. Speaker. He should listen. If he doesn't want to listen to Liberal MPs, that's fine. He should listen to Conservative MPs, a dozen, Mr. Speaker, probably more, who want the Accelerator Fund, who have advocated for it because they know it's vital to getting more homes built.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Or maybe that member should listen to the housing minister who said his $3 billion of housing accelerator money built 0 homes. Right. 0 is less than the 195,000 homes built under the Leader of the Opposition when he was housing minister. And now add this to the stellar record of a guy who broke our immigration system, who lost track of all of the people that he let in. While the Prime Minister is fighting his own caucus, he gave that minister a promotion. So when will the housing minister leave fantasy land, join Conservatives in the real world, and axe the tax so we can build the homes?
Melissa's on fire.
The Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Years ago, Mr. Speaker, when I worked with the Leader of the Opposition on the Finance Committee, he told me something that might shock you. It's hard for him to make friends because of his personality. What we look at now is he at least has one friend on the opposite side. His best friend, as I understand it, Mr. Speaker, the MP for St. Albert Edmonton. In fact, that member has advocated for the Housing Accelerator Fund. He went behind the Leader's back.
That's a weird ad hominem attack, but all right.
Friendship, Mr. Speaker. He went behind his leader's back to advocate for the half, and they want to get rid of it.
Order.
Yeah, Speaker ain't too happy.
Order. But if you're going to heckle, let it be a good joke. Anyway, the honourable member from Kenora.
They're not worth the cost of housing, Mr. Speaker, and many young Canadians have given up completely on their dream of home ownership, and it is why common sense Conservatives will axe the federal sales tax on new homes. Mr. Speaker, for an $800,000 house, this tax cut would save the home buyer $40,000. In other words, $2,200 per year in mortgage payments. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister finally listen to our common sense plan, axe the GST on housing to ensure that young Canadians can finally afford a home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Slogans, Mr. Speaker. You scratch the surface of that so-called idea, what do you find? They would axe something that would get rid of the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is so crucial. What does it do? It provides funding for affordable housing to counter homelessness. It provides funding for zoning changes. It provides funding for housing enabling infrastructure, for community centers, Mr. Speaker, even for vacant buildings in downtowns, Mr. Speaker, so they can be converted for housing. If he doesn't believe me, take the member for Central Okanagan who advocated for it, their former finance critic who unfortunately is on the back benches because he advocates for good programs.
Yeah, Fergus did let them heckle. That was kind of nice.